What would you do if someone slapped you in front of a room full of people, not knowing you were about to become their boss? Most people would explode. Some would walk away. Others would call for backup. But what if I told you that slap was about to become the most regrettable mistake of someone's career? Have you ever been disrespected so publicly that everyone around you held their breath, waiting to see if you break or fight back? Because attorney Zora Bell was about to show an entire courtroom what real power looks like when it's earned, not given. The packed courtroom fell silent. The officer who struck her had no idea what was waiting in the judge's chambers. The ceremonial robe, the swearing-in ceremony scheduled for that exact afternoon, the moment when victim becomes authority in less than 60 seconds. This isn't just about workplace harassment or police misconduct. This is about what happens when destiny collides with discrimination. If you've ever been underestimated because of who you are, or wonder what justice really sounds like, hit that like button. Because what Zora did next didn't just silence a courtroom. It made history. Zora Bell had spent her entire career preparing for moments like this, just not in the way anyone expected. Growing up in the heart of the city, she watched justice get twisted by those who wore badges and wielded gavels like weapons. Public defender, private attorney, courtroom advocate. Each role taught her the same brutal lesson. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, just not for people who looked like her. But Zora refused to accept that reality. For years, she'd been the voice that wouldn't stay quiet, the attorney who took cases other lawyers wouldn't touch, the woman who walked into rooms where she wasn't wanted and demanded to be heard anyway. She'd built her reputation one difficult case at a time, fighting for clients the system had already written off. Today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be her victory lap. Hidden in the judge's chambers, folded carefully in tissue paper, waited the ceremonial robe she dreamed of wearing since law school. The confirmation had come through weeks earlier, but the timing had to be perfect. The swearing-in ceremony was scheduled for this exact afternoon, in this exact courtroom, with this exact crowd as witnesses. What was meant to be the culmination of everything she'd worked for was about to become the ultimate test of everything she believed in. Drop a comment below. Have you ever walked into a situation where people judged you before they knew who you really were? Because what happened next proves that sometimes the universe has perfect timing. Zora entered the courtroom that afternoon the same way she always did. Head high, briefcase in hand, ready to fight for justice. She was there to support a client facing charges she knew were manufactured. Another young black man caught in the system's web. Another case where the truth mattered less than the narrative law enforcement wanted to tell. As she took her seat in the gallery, two officers near the front turned to watch her. Their expression said everything. Another troublemaker, another attorney who didn't know her place. "Excuse me, ma'am." One officer approached, his voice dripping with false politeness. "You need to move to the back. This section is reserved." Zora looked around the courtroom. No reserved signs. No special markings. Just empty seats and the officer's assumption that she didn't belong where she was sitting. "I'm an officer of this court," she replied calmly, pulling out her bar card. "I have every right to sit here." The second officer joined his partner. "Ma'am, you're interfering with official proceedings. We need you to move or leave." "I'm not interfering with anything." Zora's voice remained steady, but everyone in the courtroom could feel the tension building. "I'm here to observe, which is my legal right." That's when the first officer lost control. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, stepping closer. "You people always think you know better than everyone else." The room went quiet. Attorneys stopped shuffling papers. Court staff paused their conversations. Even the defendant turned to watch. Zora stood slowly, meeting the officer's glare with unwavering composure. "Officer, I suggest you." The sound of his open palm striking her cheek echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. For a moment, time stopped. The gallery gasped. Other officers froze. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Zora didn't stumble, didn't cry out, didn't even touch her face. She just stood there, dignity intact, looking directly at the man who had no idea he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. Share this with someone who needs to see what grace under pressure really looks like, because this story is about to take a turn nobody saw coming. The presiding judge's gavel slammed down like thunder. Recess. Everyone out except court personnel and counsel. But before the courtroom could clear, the senior judge appeared from his chambers. Judge Harrison had been on the bench for 30 years. He'd seen everything, but nothing like this. "Officer," his voice cut through the chaos, "you will step back immediately." The officer who struck Zora suddenly looked less confident. "Your Honor," she was interfering with. She was sitting in a public gallery. Judge Harrison's tone could freeze fire. "And you just committed assault in my courtroom." He turned to Zora, who still stood with quiet dignity, her cheek red but her head unbowed. "Ms. Bell, would you join me in chambers, please?" The walk to the judge's chambers felt endless. Gallery members whispered frantically. The officer stood frozen, finally understanding that something had gone very, very wrong. Inside the chambers, Judge Harrison closed the door and looked at Zora with a mixture of anger and respect. "Zora," he said quietly, "today was supposed to be your day. The ceremony, the robe, you're swearing in as this court's newest judge. But what just happened out there?" Zora's eyes filled with tears, but not from pain, from years of fighting, years of proving herself, years of preparing for this moment only to have it nearly destroyed by ignorance and hatred. "We can postpone," Judge Harrison continued. "Wait for things to calm down. Reschedule when?" "No," Zora's voice was firm. "If not now, when? If not here, where? If not after this, after what?" Judge Harrison studied her face, seeing the steel beneath the surface. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He opened the mahogany cabinet and pulled out the ceremonial robe, still wrapped in protective tissue, black silk with golden threads, symbols of justice and wisdom woven into the fabric. "Then let's make history." When the courtroom doors reopened 10 minutes later, Zora Bell walked out wearing judicial robes, flanked by court security, ready to assume the bench. The same officer who had struck her took one look at her transformation and felt his knees go weak. Judge Zora Bell took her seat behind the bench with trembling hands, but an unwavering voice. The courtroom had never been quieter. Attorneys, defendants, gallery members, and court staff all held their breath as she adjusted the microphone. "This court is now in session," she began, her words carrying the weight of centuries of struggle and triumph. "Before we proceed with today's docket, I want to address what just occurred." Her eyes found the officer who had struck her. He stood frozen near the back, his face pale with the realization of what he'd done. "Justice is never served by violence," Judge Bell continued. "In this courtroom, dignity belongs to everyone, regardless of race, gender, or position. That is not a request. It is the law." The officer tried to speak, but Judge Bell raised her hand. "Officer Martinez, you are hereby barred from these proceedings pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out." As Martinez was led away, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Cell phones appeared despite the no-phone policy. Within hours, the story would be everywhere. Local news picked it up first. Attorney slapped in court, minutes later becomes judge. Social media exploded with videos taken secretly during the confrontation. The hashtag Judge Bell started trending nationwide. Civil rights organizations released statements. Legal scholars wrote op-eds about systemic bias in courtrooms. Police departments across the country faced questions about officer training and accountability. But the most powerful response came from young black women entering law school. Applications spiked by 40% that semester. Law clinics reported record numbers of volunteers wanting to fight injustice. One student wrote in her admissions essay, "I saw Judge Bell turn her worst moment into her defining moment. If she can wear that robe with grace after what happened, I can earn mine too." Subscribe for more stories of people who turn their moments of greatest challenge into their greatest triumph, because your breakthrough moment might be closer than you think. Today, Judge Zora Bell still presides over that same courtroom, where a plaque now reads, "Justice is never served by violence. In this courtroom, dignity belongs to everyone." Officer Martinez faced disciplinary action and mandatory bias training. He later wrote a public apology, admitting his actions were inexcusable and asking for forgiveness from Judge Bell and the community. The courthouse has become a symbol of transformation. Law students from across the country visit to see where one woman's grace under pressure changed the conversation about justice in America. Judge Bell's first words from the bench that day are now taught in law schools as an example of judicial temperament and moral courage. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you creates space for the best thing you'll ever become. Watch this next story about another person who transformed injustice into inspiration.